Hello, this is Kathleen from the World Economic Federation. Today I will be talking about increasing the value of the energy credit beyond the $1 fiat security it represents, as well as how to manage inflationary forces. Other Federation programs manage the inflation caused by greed-based profiteering and monopolistic price gouging. Today, we will address concerns about potential inflation caused by energy credit oversupply in the economy. These mechanics combined allow the Federation to incentivize removing energy credits from circulation through natural market motives rather than through taxation, with the threats of penalties, fines, and imprisonment. We envision fully divorcing the economy from the state violence that politicians use to control society, while they simultaneously refuse to address society's problems, generally to the profit and advantage of the donor class with their loyalty to the fossil fuel industry. One might argue that we are perhaps painting with too broad of a brush by saying that the donor class favors the fossil fuel industry. However, we have trouble explaining the past 50 years of climate change inaction and the decline of the middle class if the fossil fuel industry and Wall Street took particular issue with either of those societal developments. The reasoning of this is that either A, our oligarchs are not nearly as capable of leaders as they claim to be, or B, they are exactly as capable as they claim to be, but would rather live in a world of brutal exploitation, human trafficking, modern slavery, and a poisoned environment, all as long as they get to step on other people so that unpleasantness shall not touch them. Perhaps there is a third option that can constitute a combination of those factors, but I will leave it to you to decide which applies and which is worse. 50 years of knowing climate change is critical, but actively campaigning to keep our leaders from addressing it is the reason, or they are too stupid to lead. It may not be your job to command a deep understanding of economics, market forces, finance, science, and governance, but it is the job of our leaders to have mastery of those things. Tell me, do our leaders have a mastery of these topics, or do they just parrot what their donor-funded think tanks tell them to say to sell the lies? Whether you are Democrat or Republican, you would probably agree that if you took money from outsiders to give discounts or even cash from the till to those groups from your employer's assets, the best that would happen to you is you lose your job. But what happens if you get to write the rules of your employer and you specifically write those rules to allow you to get away with it? While you would end up criminally and civilly liable for your behavior, our leaders go to work for those third parties to recruit their old co-workers to perpetuate the graft, and are compensated handsomely with stock options, high salaries, and generous perks. Part of the reason they can get away with this is not just because they write the laws to make themselves the exception to the laws by being in office. Another reason they can do this is that when people start to call them out on their abuses of power and on the systemic problems that they perpetuate, because these are great distractions from their incompetence and corruption, they don't try soul-searching or adjusting their behavior. Instead, they ignore you. And when you take to the streets, they send the police to put you down with gas, batons, and shields. When they can gerrymander a district to guarantee their seat, and they can send the police to take away your right to protest, what incentive do they have to do their jobs for anyone but their largest and most generous donors? This is part of the reason why the solution needs to be an external system that is not governmentally run. Our leaders are either embracing or enabling fascism in order not to cross their donors' privatization interests. These actions pave the way for a government to wield state violence in defense of corporate interests, all the way to a state of fascism where the government is simply there to subjugate the workforce on behalf of the corporate oligarchy. Given our leaders' history of corruption defending corporate interests and any potential threat to the fossil fuel industry, the success of the Federation may lie in the unique value of the energy credit. Furthermore, it is important to have an answer if politicians attempt to find a way to manipulate the fiat dollar to harm the energy credit, to protect the fossil fuel and corporate interests that they are already serving by destroying the middle class, our towns, and our planet. This requires that we have the means to differentiate the value of the energy credit from its underlying fiat value, in addition to the ability to switch the basis currency away from the protectionist chaos of our leadership. After all, if the current situation were a bug and not a feature, they would be crushing it. Instead, they have their corporate propaganda allies in the media simply blame the opposite party when both parties in the end work for the same large donors. The only distinction is one side blames Republican leaders, while Republican leaders and their propaganda outlets tell people to fear cities and minorities. We call this the culture wars. While the underlying fiat currency could simply be exchanged for another, the lesser differentiation helps address both creating a difference and incentivizing the turning in of the energy credits in circulation, absent the need of taxation. The first differentiation is that if a point of sale uses energy credits to pay for the transaction, no transaction fees would be charged on Federation systems. So while your credit card company might be charging a merchant 5% per transaction, the customer paying with energy credits knows that no fees are taken for the transaction if the merchant is part of the business support program. Not only will the customer and merchant know that the business is being supported by the transaction, but if the merchant chooses to split the savings with the customer, that is their choice to encourage that. This discount is up to the merchant and not completely based on their own wanting to provide an incentive to their business, but also to provide an incentive for energy credit usage itself. This is what brings us to the second major differentiation from the underlying fiat currency, the differentiation sponsorship pools. As with the other proof of work programs, this is driven by the purchase of green energy infrastructure with a share of second credit revenue. This pool level is set by the executive committee as part of their duties to manage the value difference based on the good of the system. These pools exist to create an offsetting subsidy for energy bills and some services, so the merchant or customer can choose between paying for their energy with their normal fiat currency or paying with energy credits to get a discount from the subsidy program as the system grows. Once energy production is meeting the growing demand and the climate crisis has been addressed, the sponsorship can be retasked as needed towards selling energy at a slight discount to encourage the use of energy credits based on their need for the credits to come back to the pools and out of circulation. The more they need them brought out of circulation, the more Federation sponsorships can go towards decirculation. The less they need it, the more energy credits they can put towards growth of infrastructure. Societal demands can vary over time, and the executive committee can retask their sponsorships to meet those demands. The more mature the system is, the more energy subsidies get prioritized, so as not to differentiate too far from the basis currency. This prevents excessive inflation of the underlying fiat currency by having energy credits be too advantageous, which would drive fiat inflation and undermine the energy credit's own basis. If the underlying fiat currency is being abused by its nation, the changing out of the fiat type could be necessary. Further, once the climate crisis has been addressed, this process could be done intentionally to cause inflation on the fiat currency, accelerating the collection of the fiat paper to address the credit debts of participating nations. This would be a rough outline of how we can use a transition to the green energy standard for international monetary policy, inflation management, and to enable participating nations to settle their debts. If you like the idea of managing inflation and making the global economy more prosperous for all, Please like, comment, and subscribe. We like the idea of a world where nations can choose between maintaining their dependency on fossil fuel despotism or prosperity for their people, because they can make capitalism pay.